Hey folks, this is Crafty Dan and welcome to the channel. And today we are going to turn this pile of parts into that airplane. This is the MiG-37B Ferret build video, tester's answer to the F-19 stealth fighter. So hang around and we'll build something cool. So we're back to parts and there's a lot of them. Today we're going to go through and piece them all together into something good. But beforehand we'll need to identify the parts as they are because, I'm too lazy to actually label them on the plans. If you get the plans, go ahead and print them out, cut and score wherever you need to. This particular longish piece is a side cheek. Goes along the side of the nose and also will form the top of the wing along this edge. You will need two of them mirrored. This long strip here is actually the bottom of the nose and bottom in front of the interior nose, and it's a strip that wraps around. Go ahead and cut and notch and bevel those lines. I'll show you how to install them in just a moment. This you'll need two of mirrored. It's what I'm calling the bottom of the fuselage. It also includes the side and the tail surfaces. Two slots in the middle for servos. Those are sized out for XT900s. Should be a decent size. There is an optional pocket right here for the prop and slot version, and there is basically a center support that goes across from one side to the other to give a little bit more strength. In the EDF version, that is not included. The other thing is there's a little pocket right here up at the front that you'll want to cut out in the prop and slot version that you won't need for the EDF. We're building the EDF today, so I didn't cut those sections out. Otherwise, pretty simple. Next part, you should have two triangles like these. These two triangles are for the canopy. They fit up in the corner of the canopy and give it a little bit more support when you glue it in place. You should have three of these sort of weird pentagon shapes. Two of one with one size hole in it, one with a smaller hole in it. The larger size hole is for a 70mm EDF. The smaller size hole is to fit the rear portion of the duct. This ducts make EDF so much better. This piece you'll need two of each mirrored, and it is what I'm calling the top. Together they become the top of the aircraft itself. Pretty simple. There is an optional slot right here for the prop and slot version where the top hole goes for the prop. You don't need this in the EDF version, so I didn't cut it out. And of course you need two of those mirrored, one of which you probably want to bevel so that they can hold together at an angle. If you're building the EDF version, these two pieces are optional. They are optional for the EDF version. These are guides for inside. They clean up the interior of the aircraft a little bit more, hides the servos behind them as a pocket, and cleans up the airflow. We also have this piece. This piece is the rear spine of the aircraft. So this goes along the top and the back. Prop and slot version, this is not included. You don't use it, mainly because you don't need it. You do other things, or you've got a big prop sitting right about there, and it's just would be more in the way. However, with the EDF version, it gives you a place to hold onto the plane as you launch it, and it's a little bit easier to work with. And finally, we come to the nose. So this folds in half. You get the other long strip wraps around it. Pretty simple layout for it. Okay, so we're back with all the nose parts here, scattered in a wild array. Again, this is the core of the nose. These two side pieces are sides to the canopy for a little bit more structure. This is going to be the bottom of the nose all the way up to the end, with this little tag coming next to it, and that will be the canopy itself. And then you have these two side cheeks that go onto the side. They help form the wing, help give a little bit more structure, a little bit more strength. Okay, so those are the basic parts. So, first things first, we're going to glue the side cheeks up, and we're going to do those at 90 degrees. There's my square. Oddly enough, the tape companies go through great difficulty making sure that these things are square. And as long as your tape has not slid one way or the other, some of the softer tapes do that, but this doesn't do it as well, you end up with actually something that's fairly square and flat. It's kind of convenient. So, we're going to take our glue, and starting with this corner, and notice that there is a little bit here that is supposed to go next to the hatch. Try not to get it too much on the hatch. We'll break the hatch free in a moment. And we hold it there. And we wait. And you are my sunshine, my only sunshine. All those fun things we sing to pass the time. I'll be back in a few. We'll do both sides. So we've got both of the sides done. One thing to be cautious, this hatch will stick on the inside as you glue it in. That's fine. You can go ahead and use a knife or just carefully pry it back while the glue is still lukewarm, and you should be able to break this free. Do be advised again, when you've got the black foam, it's going to want to start peeling back. That's why the very next step we're going to do is we're going to reinforce this hinge here with just the classic, put a little glue on it, stiffen it up. So as an example, and we're going to pretty much do that to every single one of our hinges, just because it's a good thing to do for sanity's sake. And then you wait for that to cool before you exercise the hinge again, which again, all you're doing is pour a little bit of hot glue over top of it, and then use the squeegee to force it down into the joint as much as possible. That arrests any further delams, sort of gives it a nice tack point where it holds the paper to the foam, and then gives you a good hinge, and it's pretty much dry. And so now we've got a fairly good stiff hinge. Before I do this part, I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the wraparound, and that'll make our life a little bit easier. So we're going to start with the wraparound. Kind of just positioning things. And as you can see, the paper's starting to come up kind of badly. Most other foams won't do this. That's just what the black foam tends to do. So I'm going to go ahead and put it like here. I'm going to peel up this section and glue. So put a little bit of glue here and then on the sides. Yeah, I'm being gloppy. Yeah, I'm being messy. I'm not sure that I care much. I'm going to put a little bit of glue in here where it's starting to peel up. And that. Once we get it into position, should make a fairly decent bond. Now we can treat this like a hinge, but it's not really a hinge. It's going to be a permanent bond. So we'll put a little bit of glue here before the next bond, and then go down these exterior strips to do this one long piece. Beauty of it is that's about the longest piece we have to glue on the entire aircraft. Check. Yep. Looks like that's delamming just a little bit. How do you fix delams? Fill the joint with glue. Hot. Okay, and a little bit down the center, a little bit down each side until you get to the edges. Glue gun goes back, and then if you spread the side cheeks apart just a little bit, it makes the piece slide in place. It's exactly where you want it to be. And once you're happy with it, get it flat on the table. One caution is these little strips here are kind of a little fragile. Haven't found a good solution for those. There's bound to be a small mod that will make them better, but at this point, just don't worry about them too much. In long term, they'll probably get cut off. And you hold it down till it's glued. Okay, looks there we got a good bottom. And we're going to repeat for this section, and this section to give us a nice fold over on the top. And there's the nose, the very, very tip of the nose. Get it nice and tight and cold, and then we'll be good. And off camera where you can see it, could not see it. I did the top. You lay the top flat on the edge of the table with the edge sort of right there, and that way that gets nice and flat and you don't interfere up here. On the real set of plans, there is an extra strip that extends out from here that you'll peel the foam away from, and then you wrap that all the way around. It gives you a nice clean edge right here. I was working off an old set of templates when I cut this, so I don't have it with this set. You'll like it in the final version. Okay, and so for next, we're going to do, we've got the hinge working here and it works reasonably well. Next, we kind of need to put together this part. First, I'm going to start with this piece and do the lap. Oh, excuse me. Start with this part and do the lap over. It's fairly easy to do. You just add in a little bit of glue, fold up. If the paper gets too hot, move your fingers. Hot glue is hot. And try and get this edge nice and sealed first, and then come back to this edge. Try and keep your fingers out of the edge, particularly if you're going to roll any glue out of it. I got lucky and I didn't have any excess. So now that edge is done. Next we'll fill this corner here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill the crevice about 60-80% of this, leaving a tag on either end of this so that it doesn't actually bond here. If it does, it's not the end of the world, it just makes it harder to pull the thing apart. And pull the thing apart the first time. After that it'll be fine. And so we got a little bit of D-lam here, so much the better. We need a little bit of foam, a little bit of glue. And we're going to sort of fit it into its socket and flush. And we let it hold it. Let it cool itself. And then we'll peel it out. So now you have it all glued together. It looks nice. Everything's great. And okay, so how do we get this apart? How do we get the hatch open? Well, here's the beauty of it. We haven't done anything to the rear side of this. It's fully accessible from there, but most hands are just too small for that kind of stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a ruler to stick it in and very gingerly pop it out. Now here's the thing. You're going to, from gluing this joint, you will have a little bit of resistance here just from the friction fit. You will have possibly a little bit of glue right here. There is a little bit of an overhang right here which will catch on it. It's something that could be cut out if you want to. It's probably a design flaw and it's fine. And you may have a little bit of glue that's sticking here from just bleeding out from the outer edge. So it might take a decent amount of pressure to pull it loose, but you want to put all of your pressure about here. Not here, not here, about there as you pop it out. If you put your pressure here, you're just going to bend this joint out and this part will pop loose, this part will stay in place. Push here, the whole thing will come loose. Now, for the reinforcement, because frankly we do need to reinforce this, we have these two triangles. Now the long side goes towards the front of the plane, which at the moment is the back of the plane because the canopy is fully open. But that is about how they should lay out, one on each side. The beauty of this is it will lay flush against the side here, and if you mark some lines over here, it will be basically one foam board's width on this side. I go ahead and mark it and just not cut, but then again, I mark out all of my plans, and none of them are laser cut. I don't like laser cuts. So the basics is you just put as reasonable a bead of glue as you can on either side, Make sure you have the long side going towards the nose. And you line it up as best you can. Come back with a squeegee and clean up any little bits of trash on the inside. That's one. There's the other. Okay, so long side again towards the nose, towards the front of the canopy. And line it up as best as you can with the two alignments. Try and keep your fingers out of the hot glue because hot glue is hot. Squeegee any excess before it's finally fully set. And you now have a very rigid canopy that you just slip right in. If it fits a little tight, that's actually a good thing. You want it to be a little tight. Now, as far as how to get it back open again, that's what this is for. And then I'm going to take and cut crosswise along it. I basically just chopped a piece off. About 3/4 of an inch wide. So I'm going to put a little tag here, like so. I'm going to come over the top of it like so. And then I'm going to create a little flag. The little flag is what I'm going to pull on to get it out. Like so. Push it down flat on the top. Now I have a handle to get it out. So I can close it. Nice and tight. If I want to secure this a little more carefully, I can go ahead and put a skewer straight through here all the way through. Use a piece of wire first to punch the hole. But once you get the skewer all the way through here, the canopy's not coming out. Without it, though, we've got a decent hatch that you can get into. There is plenty of space inside, and more or less the front side of the nose is done. Now we'll need to do the back and then sides, and we'll be in good shape. So, close up the hatch. We're done with it for now. Sides. Just for a little bit of ease, I'm going to do these portions first. These two little tags. Like I said, they're just little bitty tags on the EDF version. On the non-EDF version, the prop and slot version, you're going to need them to beef up the firewall mount itself. And just cleans up the edge just a little bit. This is a detail you will never see. If you cut them off, I don't think you'd even notice it. If you're doing the prop and slot and you cut them off, you will regret it. That's where your motor mounts. And you need every bit of foam on it because that's where it's going to be transmitting all the force in. So that's out of the way. I have these two tabs here. And these tabs here basically just sort of flush out this structure on the top and the bottom, fill in the box area. These work pretty easy. You just put it in there, put it in the side. If it's delaminating, give it a little bit more into the delaminating sections and fold it over. Get the two to meet. I'm going to go ahead and run a bead along the top, right where these two things join. Hot glue is hot. I'm going to use a scrap piece just to rub it down. This part of the plane will sort of be seen. It's not. This is actually going to be the top of the wing is going to be here, sitting in flush like this. So yeah, it behooves you to do a cleaner job than this. On the EDF version, we're going to have a spine sitting right in front of it, and it's all going to disappear. If you see some sections, like I've got a section here where it's got a little bit of gap in here, catch those as early as you can. Yeah, there's a little bit of unevenness, but more importantly, you've got a structural weakness there because you didn't quite get enough glue into the joint as you build it out. So this is one other area where you really want to add in the glue and squeegee it out. And if it's squeegeeable, you don't want it there, it's extra weight. If it's not squeegeeable, it's actually filling the joint. It's one of the stellar things about hot glue is that it's very good at gap filling. And so if you've got a gap there, it fills it up with glue. You don't have to be super precise when you're using it, or have really clean butt joints where everything's joined up nicely. So that's more or less the fuselage. I'll have plenty of stringies and such to clean off for ages. To the side cheeks, we will be done with the nose. Now the side cheek itself is an interesting piece. It's a fairly rare fold that I use sometimes in my designs and my builds. It's not one that's common to flight test builds. Effectively, you've got a full piece here that's loose and a cavity in between. I'm going to use this strip of paper here to lap over top this open piece here. So this is going to be reversed completely like that. The trick is it tends to want to catch on this corner here as it comes over that corner. If you can always cut the corner back a little bit, it's not adding a whole lot of strength where it is right there, but it will make it harder to actually turn the corner. It's up to you. I usually just use it in place and it gets deformed a little bit and a little bit of extra glue gets left in place, and that's fine. So you add glue to the cavity and then add glue to the end of the foam on the opposite side of the cavity, the sort of squarish part, and you flip it over. And here's the trick. I want to make sure that this part is as flat as I can possibly get it, and that this part, the part that's up, is square. Take my square, hold it up to it. I'm pressing against the joint itself to push it in and hold it in place. When it's done, again, this is going to be, this tab here is going to be a full foam board's width out, and it will key in with that slot right there. And that one in particular, as opposed to the one on the other side, which is a mirror. And again, with this piece, this notch does not exactly match up. There is a little bit of relief in here extra for the firewall itself that is not reflected in this piece, but these ends should match up with the ends here. The notch will match up with the notch, so they key together fairly well. And when you get done with this, when you actually build this out, this curved section is where the top of the leading edge of the wing, the little empennage up the front, it will just sort of lean right over top of that. It's really kind of like a fairing for the engine intakes. Anyways, so again, one of the things we like to do, now that everything is more or less dry, this will be exposed, this will actually be glued to, or this side will be exposed, this side will actually glue to the bottom plates. That's how they connect together. And this section will actually connect and glue to this piece here. So the next thing is to do a bit of a dry fit. And we just sort of put the two pieces together. Sure enough, they latch. Oh, look, see, we get good alignment up at the nose. Good alignment at the back, sort of. Like I said before, there is a little bit of a gap right there between where the firewall will go in and where the edge is. That's about the thickness of 2 flight test firewalls. I don't know what those thickness of the ply they use. And so that piece more or less fits. It will be the side of your aircraft with your wing, coming down this edge to sort of form the actual intakes. That is one of the non-scale details of the MiG-37. The MiG-37, the weird design of it was intended to have the intakes on the top. That was one of the neat design considerations they've done for most stealth aircraft, to hide the jet engine intakes, because the engine on most of these airplanes is actually more visible than anything else on the aircraft when you're talking in radar space. So they put the intakes on the top so ground-based radars can't see them. Unfortunately, that kind of dirties the design itself. It's really easy to put them on the bottom, and guys, frankly, most of you aren't going to notice it looking up on the aircraft whether the intake's on the bottom or the top. Sorry, it looks right anyways. So that's one of the areas where I've actually deviated from the scale detail. I haven't put the intakes on the top. I put the regular sort of ram type intakes that you'd find on an F-15 or so. Okay, so for this, since these two pieces go together, I'm going to go ahead and glue a little bit here on this tab here, and then squishy, squishy, squishy all the way across the rest of this thing. Okay, so I'm back with a new stick. This is, by the way, the 1.5 stick, not the second stick. I started with the half stick. And so I'm going to put a little bit of glue right here on the edge there. And then very quickly, well, because I don't want that glue to dry. You do have time with these, but it's best to get it done as quickly as you can. And viola. That is one side cheek. And you're going to see a little bit of white lines from this, just because I didn't do spray paint. That would have probably cleaned this up a bit. However, it's going to give it a little bit of outlines that you wouldn't normally have. It will look really cool. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, since no sense in watching me do it twice. And we'll be back when I'm done with that. Okay, and so that yields us one completed nose. One caution, it's really easy, particularly when you're dealing with large plates like these and gluing one to the next. Hot glue isn't fantastic for laminating things together. It is what it is. So if you see some gaps in here where the area just doesn't seem like it's binding very well, go ahead and just put in some more hot glue, put in some hot glue on the seam, squeegee it back out. That should strengthen everything else. Again, anything that squeegees out, you don't want its extra weight. Anything that you push into the foam, you want, because that's actually reinforcing the joint. And that should give us a working nose. Okay, so we're back with trying to build the bottom. Now that we have finished the nose, that's the next step. These parts, it's probably best to go ahead and cut, bevel, and glue prep the hinge itself. Before we start assembling the two sides together. It's a little easier to do when you have one side piece. And one thing to notice about this and the other piece, I did not put marks on there for where the control horns go. The horns themselves, the control horns, I usually put them to basically where they just need to be. I've used the standard flight tests, control horns and the plans. That's easy to use, and they work reasonably well with the servos these are sized for. These in particular are sized for Hextronic 900s, Turnigy TG9s, or the Tower Pro 9 grams. They're all about the same size servo. I'm going to use a slightly larger servo today, more because I have those on hand than any other reason. So when it comes to actually assembling these, we've got past the preambles. Effectively, the first step is to go ahead and tape these two pieces together. On the plans, you'll have a hatch here that for the prop and slot version, I almost encourage you to put it on there. That's almost required. For the EDF version, it's more along the lines of the optional. I will not be installing it, mostly because it's not on the templates that I have, and because you really do need to get with the EDF version in particular, you need to get all of the wiring in place before you close up the top. So there's no point in having this hatch here. It's just a loss of strength of the body itself. So we will tape these two sides together very carefully, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so we get a little tape on the bottom, not real rocket science, just being very careful to keep everything close. And that leaves us with a gap right here on the side, center. So if you then open up the gap as best you can, add in a little bit of glue. stopping just before you get to the end so you don't have mess everywhere. And when you put it out, you get a little bit out on the outside edge. Squeegee the excess in place, and now you've got a nice set. Another layer of tape over top of that. Okay, so now that we've got this all glued together, if you have not already, go ahead and crack these surfaces and bevel them as best as you can. It's kind of important to do that because we're going to be folding these up in just a moment, and they need to fold up cleanly. If while the bevel itself and the correct amount of bevel is marked on the plans, adding on a little bit more does not hurt because the glue itself will gap fill. You don't want to add egregious amounts or double bevel it, that's too much. But just a single bevel and even up to a 45 was more than enough. The point is we're going to be placing these pieces here and bringing it up to that and letting the glue dry in place. That should hold everything nicely. But you want to be able to sort of pull it up and have it hold the angle itself with little resistance. Before we do that though, we will be putting the nose on. That's actually the next step. So, as always, dry fit. So we close our nice little canopy out. This is the bottom of the nose, and so we need to take the bottom side of the bottom and sort of dry fit it in place. You notice I've got these little bitty tabs here. Those tabs are to cover the very ends here. And you'll notice it's going to be a tight fit. That's okay. That's actually a good thing. There might also be some gaps back here. That's also okay. Hot glue will fill those gaps. But as long as everything sort of fits well, everything sort of lays up against the little flaps on the side cheeks just right, then that means when we glue this in place and flip it over, we'll hold down on the nose just to hold it in place, and it should build a really good joint. So, pop this out. And we filled the pocket. Filled the pocket. Ow. Okay. Because I do actually keep some of this off the table. Flip it over. And make an unholy mess of this stuff. And folks, if this does not convince you that a little bit of imprecision is a-okay, I don't know what will. Because that was a horrible job. Anyways, so that should hold pretty well. Pressing down to dry. It's already more or less dry. Since I've got a bit of cavity in the back, I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. Make sure that I've got a good glue joint right along here. Let that dry. Peel up the excess that's dried on the table real quick. Verify that I don't have too much leaking through. And splendid. We now have the nose actually adds a little bit of support in. These flaps will, these side pieces here will overlap just a little bit. That's okay actually, because they will, as you pull the sides up, they will nest beautifully in there. It's almost like they were sized for that. They were. So, now that that's happy, if you were building the prop and slot, you would have a big slot sitting right there. This would be an ideal time to install your motor, get it sort of out of the way, and install it without the prop. Mainly because this is the last time you'll have really good access to there. When we fold up the side cheeks, you'll have a little bit longer that you can put that in, or fold up the sides, you'll still have a good amount of room, but just be aware. You'll also have a slot right here. I would still recommend, despite the fact you don't need the EDF pieces, go ahead and leave the circles in them for now. And if you were using the prop and slot, tape them down centered to these pieces and use them as the guide for how high up you want to do them. Just the only caution is to avoid putting glue just like within 1/4 inch of where they are, so that when you fold it up, there might be a little dry spot there in the joint. The fuselage will be more than strong enough for it, and you can pop it out before you put the top on. So, more or less, nose is dry, really, really dry, and we're almost ready to fold up the sides. Before we do that, we deal with our EDF. Now, one of the issues that you might run into, and hey, it looks like I did too, is if the EDF itself is, I mean, most of them are rated by the inner diameter itself, not the outer diameter. And if the size around the circle, I didn't cut enough of an extra outer diameter for you to actually assemble it, because the wall thickness is too thick or whatever, it's fairly easy to fix. You basically trim off, I'll have optional lines to cut. You trim off the piece, the top piece here, just take it off, and then set them in like so. Glue one of them, get it where you want it, nice and happy. Do remember the direction of the airflow, kind of important. And then when you glue the other one in, just as it's drying, set it down, or just before it starts to dry, set it down so you can make sure they're both aligned with each other. If they'll set flat on the surface, they'll hold pretty well. Okay, then we're going to use this to basically position here, and we'll use that to set the angle by folding these two sides up. Now, the reference point that I'm using for this particular piece is actually the back of the servo right here. So we want to have just a hair's breadth worth of space between this and the servo. We'll do one at a time, just to make sure that we've got a good connection before we move to the second one. Again, pretty simple, not rocket science. Pull out your gun. Add a healthy bead of glue all the way down the seam, maybe leaving a little bit extra on the outside edge. Place this in about the center where you want it. It's not going to be permanent there, but you kind of want it somewhere there. As long as this thing folds up without too much resistance, you can pull on any one point on it and the whole thing will come up and hold the joint. And then you just sit and wait. If you feel like you've got a good reference here already, you can set this aside so that it doesn't glue in position. That's up to you. And you let go, and it holds its own. More or less have a solid joint ready for the next side. And it's sort of almost coming into shape. So last we left off, we had finished building out the EDF and the housing for it, pulled up the sides and built out the sides, and again came to the perfect time to install all of the electronics. So that's what I've done. Sort of paused for the evening, built out a few harnesses. I've got some harnesses that I built out of ribbon cable. You can use extensions to get however you want your servos out to your receiver. Extensions wise, it hardly matters. You can run this off of a 4-channel receiver if that's what you have. In this case, I have an RX4, one of the new ones from FreeSky, the tiny ones. And so I will be running the ailerons wide, that's built into the harness, and the tail as a V-tail. Later when you get to your radio, that's how you would set it up. In any case, so we've gone ahead and I've glued this in place. I put extensions on the wire just to get the ESC back up into the canopy itself and into the front of the nose of the aircraft. And then took the ribbon cables to route out the signals, because these servos have reasonable but not particularly long wires to them. And they'll fit beautifully in there. Everything will work. I have no problems with that. I've stuck the wires, the harnesses out the farthest servo hole, because then I know I can get to it later when I want to get ready to install it. You can install the servos here and now if you need to. There's a little bit less fishing if you do. The next thing that we are going to do after this is glued in place, which I've already glued it in place, is we're going to worry about the thrust cone that goes on the tail. You get a pattern for it in the plans, and effectively it turns into a cone like this. Now this I printed off of transparency paper. It's acetate sheeting effectively. Now one thing to advise, it is going to stick out of the rear funnel by a fair margin. The idea is that these thrust cones have to coalesce the flow of air coming out over the motor. The motor takes up space and then there's not space there anymore. So you close up the hole and then you can funnel it and focus it just a little bit more than what the original space is. The typical idea is to take the fan surface area, the amount of actual area that the fan exists in, and then reduce it by about 85%. That's pretty much closer to 95%, mostly because the funnel itself is fairly short. Typically you want to have these funnels about 2.5 times the length, the diameter of the fan, and right now we're only at about even with this section sticking out the end, we're only at about 1.5. So I'm not shrinking it all the way down to the 85 that most everybody prefers. But the idea is we'll go ahead and put this together. Again, you don't have to use acetate sheeting. I like using acetate for one primary reason is it's crazy smooth. The downside to it is it's crazy smooth, so it doesn't really take glues very well. Acrylic glue sticks to it beautifully though, and this is probably your best source of acrylic glue. Just a standard old packing tape sticks to acetate reasonably well. So I used basically a piece of painter's tape to hold it in place on the inside, covered the outside with the packing tape, and then pulled the painter's tape, put a couple of pieces of the packing tape on the inside to seal it all up, and now we've got a fairly decent funnel. The plastic itself is fairly rigid as long as you don't bang it around a bit, and while this will stick out the back of the aircraft a little bit from where it's sitting right now, it should be easily clear of any damage from crashes. If you crack this from a crash, you've done good. Anyways, so the next step after this is to assemble these two, slip it over the length, get it close, and once you have everything pushed into place, then you'll want to put some hot glue on it to install. I won't demonstrate that. I think you've got that figured out. The next thing after that is where these servo pockets go. So you'll have the servos sticking in here, like so. For the ailerons, I like to put the head of it a little bit farther forward, so like sort of like so, like this, and they will be mirrored because ailerons work better mirrored, particularly if you're going to Y them together. So just sort of fish them through and pop there in place. Hot glue it in place and it's good. Again, I like to put the horn side of it, this side of it, a little bit farther forward, just to give you a little bit more room, more length on the actual push rod, because the push rods on these are crazy short. The ones on the tail, I like to do the exact opposite, with the horn side of the servo facing the rear. If you were to want to do this with one channel, or basically as a 3-channel plane as opposed to a 4-channel plane, where these are not V-tail but instead just elevators, you can do that, but you will, instead of mirroring these, you'll have to match them. So one of these you'll put the horn forward, the other one you'll put the horn back. One of the push rods will be a little bit longer. That length, it's not going to matter. So I'm going to go ahead and do all that up, not force you to watch me futz around with it, and we'll come back when we're ready to actually, I'll give you a quick rundown once I've got it all glued in place, and then we'll move on to the top. Okay, so we're back, and pretty simple, just to show you the results. It is easier to install this back plate here if you fold both of your V-tails back. That gives you a clear edge right to here. And you can put this flush against it. If it feels a little tight as it's going on, please dry fit naturally. But if it feels a little tight going on, just feel free to widen out the whole circle here just a little bit, just so that it all fits snug, but not so tight that it wants to fold over the cone itself. The cone itself will almost free float in there. I put a little bit of a tack of glue around the top where it connects to the EDF itself, but otherwise it should free float in there just fine. There's more than enough foam holding it in place. For the side pieces, the duct guides, effectively, you just put a glue on them. I set them into the back, right up here against the edge of the EDF, trying keeping them as vertical as I can, and then slide them over. This point is the other point to reference. You point reference here and reference here. If these 2 points are more or less lined up with the tops of the pieces next to them, so that this line sort of forms a part of the same plane as where the top surface will go, then you've got it lined up properly. Push it back against the bottom, let the glue set. Forms a nice little pocket that you can easily tuck all of the wires into. When you actually glue in the top, it should hold in place. The top itself, when we glue it in, as you'll see, these portions are not going to have any glue on them. There's no way to get any glue in there fast enough that if you set it down it will dry. That's okay. There will be enough glue holding it on and enough physical structure on this holding it in shape that you really won't have much leakage, and if you do have any leakage of air going in there, there's nowhere for it to go. So you'll get just a tiny bit of air leak in there, pressurizes the chamber, and basically the air becomes a part of the wall, forcing the air back into the funnel. So effectively, this is how all of the electronics are laid out in it. Next stop, we're working on the top. Okay, so we're on to the top, and we have the 2 top pieces we pretty much cut and prep. Putting your bevels on the back side and glue protecting that hinge. Again, you roll it back, put in glue, wipe it out. Go ahead and cut this seam. This is for the leading edge, and the best way to deal with this is to go ahead and crush the very inside edge of it with the back side of your knife. Just run it right across it with a little bit of force. The idea is to give it just enough so that you can lift it up the width of the foam board. It does not take much to do it right, and if once you get it to give you that much movement, you're done. Doesn't take much crush to do that. So then you'll want to cut the cavities here. These are for barbecue skewers for strength. Now, I'm using barbecue skewers in this build. Previous build I used carbon rod. Use what you have, but barbecue skewers, they're cheap, they're easy. The cuts that I have here are sized to the barbecue skewers flight test comes out with, which is about 1/8 of an inch in size, 3 millimeters-ish. Cut them to the size, just about the size of the skewers that you have, because you want the fit to be fairly snug so that when you slip it in there, it holds in place and grips it fairly well. The edges over here on the other side, you will want to crush them pretty much like these. I've left them uncrushed so you can see. I'm basically just taking the knife and going over the edge backwards out of a little bit of a bevel angle. And when you do it, you get a little edge that'll crush just a little bit. You can crush it by hand, but pushing down a little bit with a sharp implement helps sort of speed it along. Does not have to be precise. That is what these edges are. These edges here are for along this. That's what we'll set it against. But it's good to prep them at first. So I'll go ahead and finish putting in the other barbecue skewer, and then we'll see you back in just a few. Okay, so we're back. We've got skewers in place. All of the edges are prepped. And so I went and took the liberty of putting tape on the bottom surface so this thing is held together now. And just to take a step back, sort of apologize, although sorry not sorry, I know you were probably thinking it when we got to the point in the middle of the description of parts and got all the way to the end of the description of parts, and I did not describe what that is. This is the only thing that I didn't define in the set that was there. This is our Dihedral gauge. We'll be using this to set how far up this wingtip goes when we glue it. So, effectively, piece of tape here acts as a hinge. We will fill this cavity full of glue. This is sized perfectly to go under this corner right in front of the aileron hinge. Put it there, glue it, and it makes a nice little dihedral. Again, like we did the sides on the body itself, you make sure that you've carved off enough of that cavity that it will do this fold without any extra tension. We don't crush the foam, don't bother with crushing the foam, because we'd rather have a more accurate angle that the glue basically fills the gap than we would a guessed at angle that has more crushed foam in it. The glue will give us plenty of strength where we need it, and it will hold everything together beautifully. Don't worry about that. So next step, it's ever so popular, fill the cavity with glue. Lift up the edge and we see all that wonderful glue oozing out. That is a good sign. Hold it here and come back with a piece of scrap. Our scrap just happens to be round at the moment. It doesn't really matter. For sanity's sake, weight down the other side so it has something to hold against. And we wait a few moments for everything to dry, and we should have something that looks fairly nice in just a few moments. And the moment of truth is at hand. I put on a little extra glue onto the center joint just to give it a little bit more strength, give it a little bit more time to dry. But keep in mind, guys, if you put in extra glue into a seam, you're also injecting heat into it. If you're wanting to hold this particular shape, make sure you hold it. So in particular, in this case of a dihedral, if I put more glue in the center, I need to use my Dihedral gauge to hold it in place. But everything's had enough time to dry, and moment of truth, folks, we've got a working wing. Next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and set the angles on these. Pretty simple to do. I'll work on this one first, but the trick is I want to have an extra piece of foam board around so that when I lift this up, I'm going to lift it up, fill the glue cavity, pull it back down, and I'm going to lay it just over the edge of that foam, because I want this to slide up, or down in this case because it's the underside of the wing. I want this to be pulled up one width of the foam. That's one width of the foam. It's exact. But you just need to be careful that you just get close to the edge. Don't put this like all the way under like that, because then it will be far more than that, and you'll get a weird amount. So just don't do that. So as you can see, I added on a new stick. So we're up to 1.5 sticks burned. And a modest amount of glue in here. Try not to keep it out of this cavity in the middle. And you can put a little bit right here at the edge where it's holding. We can do a little bit more in a moment when we're done. And again, pull it in, pull it up so that it gets a nice amount of glue, and we end up with this little bit of beading on the end, and that is the perfect stuff to squeegee right out. Give it a little force to hold down, let it dry, and it'll be done. We'll do the other one while y'all are watching, and we'll be back in a few. Okie dokie, we are getting so close to being done with this thing. So we are at the stage where we button everything up. After this point, it's going to be hard to get to any of your electronics, so make sure you've got everything you want. You've tested out your servos and you feel confident that they work right. Your ESC, your EDF, and all that are happy. I've already tested them. I like what I've got set up. So the idea is that these pegs are going to fit in these slots. these pegs are going to fit in those slots, and everything will work just fine. Problem is, this cavity right here, this gap is pretty long. That's intentional. I wanted to give us a good amount of strength. The problem is, it's going to take a little bit of cajoling to get it in place. And one of the tricks to doing that, one of the secret reasons why these counterbalances on the front of our V-tails are so large, is because I'm going to use every bit of this space to get the wings all the way up close to here so I can slide it in place. There's not much to it, just trying it. So you line it up on the front. Hopefully if you cut everything right, it should all fit in place. With these leading edge slats, it's a little tighter than it was the first time I did this. Once you slip it in place, it comes up against the cavities, and everything should more or less slot into place. There is a notch right here on the V-tail itself, and that should lead up right against the trailing edge of the wing itself right here. The leading edge of the wing behind the shoulders should come right up in against the bottom of the slot, and these two wing pegs should drop right into place. More or less, that's a good way. Once you've got that, you know you've got things in good position. I'm going to go ahead and slide it out, back out again. So you can do dry fits with this. You don't want to do too many, because it does sort of bend up and break and nudge the foam in inconvenient directions. Like that. Once you're happy with it, I would recommend filling these two cavities and these two cavities with glue and go to town. Don't worry about the top surfaces here. If you want, you can put a big glob right there, right on top of your EDF. It should it should hold right onto the top of the fuselage. I'm going to do that actually. Maybe a few seams I'll probably put a drop right there, but otherwise I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm going to let the rest of the cavity hold it in place, and we'll glue in all the other seams from the sides when we're ready. So, time's to glue. So, big honking glob. Fill the cavity, fill the cavity, fill the cavity, fill the cavity. The rest, we will leave 2 outer seams. Beauty is, once you've done this once, more or less, all the pieces where they're supposed to be, and they should more or less just fall into place. Hold it for a few minutes, make sure the tabs are all in place and happy. Let them dry. They will hold the fuselage together enough that you can come back and do the major seams, seal this thing up. Basically, I'm going to put a major seam right here over these 2 V-tails and come in under the wing, do the same thing on the underside of the wings. That should be enough to hold this plane together. It really doesn't take much. So now that the wing is on and we've done both of the rear surfaces and the undersides here, the body itself is actually pretty well attached, put together. Next is a nice little cosmetic piece. This sort of forms a nice cowling over the front. Basically crush those 2 portions, and one will set down on top of the front side and the other will fold right over top. It just fits beautifully. Just the glue bead here, glue bead there, glue bead in here. That's all it takes. Do it to both sides. I'll show you the one And so glue bead there, glue bead there, glue bead up to that notch. Don't go any further than that because there's no foam beyond that. And hold it in place until dry. Doesn't take much, adds a nice little detail, looks nice on both sides. And so do that one, do the other side, and we'll be done with that part. Now if we were working on the prop and slot version, we'd more or less be done with cutting the foam and putting things together. The only thing left we would have is to put in the linkages and we'd be done. But because there's no slot right here, we deal with this piece, which is more or less just a spine to go over the back. Cut out and bevel as best as you can. The bevels here are really hard to do right, so you can peel back all the paper or peel out all of the foam if you like. It's one of those things that right on the back detail, it might look a little sloppy because the angles are just so shallow, it's hard to do pristinely right. But pretty much it's like every other B-fold to the B-folds over on here. Get everything nice and straight and flat with this as you can, and then come back and attach it to the fuselage. You'll see how it looks in just a moment. So now that we got our B-folds done and nice and glued up, it does sort of fit straight, flat, double check, dry fit as best as you can. And you know, hey, that looks kind of nice. There's floppy bits back here. The glue will take care of that pretty much. So next, do all the seams. I'm going to put a decent amount of glue in here, but try and keep it feathered to the edge so that it's kind of thin when it gets there. And keep in mind, wherever I have modeled a bevel onto the foam, it's because in the virtual model there was foam on foam contact. Oop. Don't forget to do it at the back side while you're at it. And as always, watch out. Hot glue is hot. And it doesn't have to look super pretty. This thing is trucking around the field at a decent clip. They are going to be so busy looking at, holy cow, that's a cool model. I think I built one of those when I was a kid. Is that Russian stealth plane? And you can puff up your chest and say, yep, I built this one myself. Plans are online. Come on, please, share them. It's pretty much done. Last things you'll need to do is put in the linkages. I am sorry, that is one of my most hated portions of building an aircraft is putting in linkages. So I am going to be a real punk and let you guys figure that out for yourself, because it really isn't rocket science. The only thing I would caution again is use linkage stoppers on at least the ailerons. Whether you put them on the aileron horn or the control horn or the servo horn, doesn't really matter. Just put one on either side, because the linkage, again, this linkage here is very short, and so cutting it to the exact length, it's really easy to get the air on it. You also want to set this thing to neutral, and neutral is not flat with the foam like it normally is. This is an airfoil, so the ailerons are drooping just a little bit. How much? One width of a foam board. So you want to line the top corner here with the bottom corner there, and that should be about where your neutral spot is when you set your aileron throw to 0, and then everything else after that is trim. Not much else to say. Again, when you set up your radio, set up the ailerons as normal ailerons and the tail as a V-tail. You can set it as an elevator so that both of them come up or down in unison. Plane won't notice the difference. But if you've got the extra channel, which, I mean, come on, 4 channels, not that hard, you can then do left and right with them too and get them in rudders. Just keep in mind, if you are actually going true 3-channel with this, that these two mirror each other, these two do not. And pretty much that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the MiG-37 Ferret. We'll see it in flight hopefully in a few days, and thank you for watching.